Bonjour, I'm Wab Canoe. I'm an Anishinaabe from the Ojibways of Enigaming First Nation in Ontario. My first language is Ojibwe. Now I live in Winnipeg. I'm a TV journalist and I make hip-hop music. I know what some people might be thinking, where's his rezzed-out accent? And Native people make hip-hop music? Look, we all have stereotypes in our head, but don't you think it's time to move past them? As one First Nations prophecy says, it's time for the 8th fire, time to build a new relationship. In this, the last episode of our series, we're going to look at some people who are doing just that. Believe it or not, some of them are even having fun trying. Don't worry, this show won't be violent. What you just saw was art, a performance. The artist is Deariule Michel Savard. He's a Wendat Huron from Wendake, and his target is this. It's a 64-page document. It's the Indian Act. It was passed in 1876. Its avowed goal was to assimilate us, to turn us into white people. It regulates every aspect of our lives. It treats us like minors. It treats us like children. It's a stifling law, it's a paternalistic law, and it's a major roadblock on the path to the future. Michel Savard got more and more angry, and then he pulled out his gun.
By taking a shot at the act, the idea was to create something there to expose the wound that we suffered, all of us, the native peoples. In fact, across the world, every indigenous nation has suffered some prejudice and been traumatized. It's not the wound left by the law that's important. It's the shells and wampum beads that emerge from the wound. Our traditions, our voice, our way of doing things flow directly from the limitations imposed by the Indian Act.
Michel Savard's shot echoed loudly. It led to a traveling exhibition called the Indian Act Revisited. 8 Aboriginal artists created works inspired by different aspects of the law, some irritating, some repressive, and some, well, just absurd. In one of the works, you watch Wendake artist France Gros-Louis Morin filling bags with soil and then hauling them off the reserve. This is illegal under the Indian Act. At the same time, she displays photos of quarries where outsiders pillage the resources on the traditional lands of the Indians. This, though, is perfectly legal. Another work echoes a more dramatic consequence of the Indian Act. From the 1960s to the 80s, thousands of Native children were torn from their families and placed in foster homes or given up for adoption to white families. It was a shameful chapter of our history, and it inspired a work by Angela Sterritt, a Gitxsan from British Columbia.
It's called Wards of the Crown, and it's about a woman having the ability to keep her child, because in Canada, if you're an Aboriginal woman and you have a child and you make one little mistake, I mean, it could be you could just be living in a level of poverty, and you'll be looked at with a lot more scrutiny than any other race.
Et où la tortue? Moi, je vois pas de tortue. Où quoi c'est? Ouais. C'est une Ojibwe qui est écrit là. Maman, c'est quoi ça? When a woman married a non-native person, or an Indian without status, or a Canadian, she was losing her status and was automatically expelled, kicked out from her community.
That article of the Indian Act was amended in 1985. A Native woman who marries a white man no longer loses her Indian status. But the law still discriminates by putting up other obstacles which make it difficult for a First Nations woman to hand on her Indian status to her children.
For example, I were to have a child with a white man, and my son had a baby with a white woman, that would mean he would lose his status. So we see residual sex discrimination in the Indian Act.
Okay, see you. Bye, Nami.
The Indian Act regulates a multitude of activities. Article 30 prevents anyone from entering the reserve without permission of the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs. Michelle Savard can't help wondering if that has something to do with the cycle of poverty and dependence the reserves have helped create.
In the work I did, I asked, why can't you enter an Indian reserve anytime you wish? Maybe at some point there was something to hide, the poverty of the people living there, or the social problems. You can see, it doesn't make any sense.
The Indian Act created reserves, and the reserve system created problems. Lots of them. Take Blackstone, for example. You won't find Blackstone on any map. It's the name of a series produced by an Aboriginal team airing on the Aboriginal People's Television Network. Though it's the name of an imaginary reserve, the problems are real. Corruption, violence, drug addiction. The series is controversial. It paints a tough picture. It doesn't pull any punches. And it's been renewed for a second season.
Previously on Blackstone.
Holy shit.
I don't want you hanging around with that girl. As a matter of fact, I want you to stay away from that whole fucking family. You hear me?
This ain't a family business. I built this club on my own, and I didn't need to suck on the tit of Blackstone to get it.
You know, maybe I just don't want to do drugs every minute of every day. Have you ever thought of that?
What we wanted to do is just show a new generation kind of questioning and coming up and presenting challenges to the old guard, if you will, and just looking for new ways to promote accountability and transparency within the communities. That's your cue to come in.
So I don't say come here?
No, let's lose those last two lines.
The things that have happened in the show have happened to real people like myself. I've lived through those struggles, and I think that's important for people to know that these things are going on, and we're having a voice through the show speaking about these issues.
Daddy! I'm frustrated too. My ex-wife is living in the city with some guy who's looking after my daughter. Maybe this was a lost cause.
One of the things that non-Native people see in Blackstone is that there's universal themes in the show. You know, corruption, addiction, sexual assaults. Any of those challenges exist in the non-Native communities. It's everywhere.
I think, too, we need a beat when you realize that Andy has a piece of bread in her. I think that's a big point.
I think that kind of interest in the show creates a dialogue within the community, and it becomes a discussion piece. And I do think that that awareness that, you know, these kind of challenges exist in the communities is a healthy thing for the communities because it does promote dialogue.
Action.
Blackstone sets off storms of discussion, according to Ron Scott. For a long time, one of the hottest topics for First Nations has been the Indian Act. And more to the point, what do you do with the Indian Act?
If I had a magic stick with two powerful power attached to my magic stick, I would say yes, no more Indian Act, because for me it's that legislation doesn't recognize me as a human being. I'm just a member. I'm not even an adult under the Indian Act. It doesn't recognize my culture, my territory, my history, my language, my values, etc., etc. It's just telling me what to do and how I should be. We have to abolish this Indian Act.
The word is out. The Indian Act has to be scrapped, otherwise reconciliation is a dead letter. The future is bleak. I know it's easier said than done. My status card, for example. Will I still have one of these? Reserves, band councils, what happens to all of that? And perhaps, most importantly, what happens to the $5 a year I'm promised under Treaty Number 3? I know, it won't be easy.
So my other power that I have in my magic stick would be I'm entitled to decide for my present and my future, and also I have a land where I can be feed with it, or, you know, self-government. I have something in place, a charter, a constitution, where my rights are protected.
Give us what we're owed, and we'll get on with it. I think we're capable of running our affairs, no problem. We did it for thousands of years, and we can do it today.
I've been walking for the last 15 days, total of 400 kilometers and still 30 kilometers to go. I have been through a difficult time, especially the first weekend. I had water to my ankle, and sometimes I was able to see holes through the ice, so it was dangerous to fall in those holes.
Dr. Stanley Vaillant is an Inuit and the first Aboriginal surgeon in Quebec. Now he's given himself another challenge, to walk 4,000 kilometers across Labrador, Quebec, and Ontario in 5 years. One of his goals, he wants young people to challenge themselves.
3 years ago, when I did Compostela in Spain, I had a dream that I was walking in my land, seeking for youth, speaking with them about importance of dreaming and pursue our dreams. So I think there is an emergency. It's midnight -1. 75 to 80% of the Aboriginal youth gonna drop out from school. If we lose this youth, we're gonna have a big problem.
Stanley Vaillant is right. The Aboriginal dropout rate is a disaster. But not just for us, for you too. Think about it. Canada overall is an aging society. But among Aboriginal people, there's a demographic explosion. That's a huge reserve, no pun intended, a huge reserve of talent, but right now it's talent lost and wasted when it's needed in the workplace. When you talk about a path to the future, there's one already laid out, the path of education. So how do you get our young people to stay in school? Stanley Vaillant has an answer. They need role models. Role models they can identify with.
In the past, I thought I was not accessible because people thought I had a perfect road on my life, and I never had the difficulty. Today, what I want to do is to be humble, to be simple, and to come walking or coming snowshoeing in the community and tell the people, I'm like you, I was like you when I was young, and I'm coming with a very simple message that is, you have to have a dream, and you have to pursue your dreams and to work to pursue your dreams.
كوامل وحصدي كبيدا هنديات نمستمي لونها تشونا سبو موديل نمستعقدان نبوامنان يجيش نحسبوا أكيد نباي خوبنان ياتي موديات. Si te megna tamne beter undi tgided no egata pastenmak boad manji da bchin gambliat o basman tgedid no gasno tgedid no idek win da gnu hiek tgedin da gnu no e win da gnu hiek tgwizid no na tamna gadan tzi tayan tzi wizigo in waset.
Our young people actually face the challenge they are facing in education is to persevere. What am I going to do after school? Is there any future for me? Is there anything that I can do in my community? It's really hard for them to aspire to something when they're going to be older. It seems that they have a low esteem also, and it's really hard for them to leave their community and to face the Canadian society.
Our message for them is to know who they are, who are their ancestors, to help them to project into their future. I live with my grandparents. My cultural roots are very strong. Helped me to get along into my life because I was well grounded.
Mes grands-parents, eux autres, n'ont pas eu la chance d'aller à l'école. Mon grand-père a été une demi-journée à l'école. Ma grand-mère est plus éduquée, elle a été une semaine à l'école. Tu sais, quand m'a amené le gars, tu sais, tu as d'autres? Tu là? Tu sais, tu as là? Ça va?
I see the lights, the flame in their eyes when I'm telling my story, what I'm doing with my journey. And I just would like to see those lights continue in the future.
What I realized it's the important for me to come back to those communities in 1 year just to make sure the message is getting through.
Valant is back on the road again. He has thousands of kilometers to cover this year, next year, and the year after. He delivered his message in New Tashkuan, but were the young people really listening? Will the kids walking with him today be willing to go the extra mile tomorrow?
I know that they won't all become surgeons and physicians, but at least they're gonna have a dream to pursue. They're gonna have the sense they can do everything in their life.
What makes it easier to be here at First Nations University is the fact that you're not just a number, you know? It's like a family, I guess.
Penny Smoke is a Cree from Saskatchewan. She doesn't know Stanley Valant, but in a way, she's responding to his call. She's studying at the First Nations University in Regina. This is a unique institution. All the courses flow directly from Native reality. Today, the university is holding its annual powwow.
Culture was a lot of part of our life when I lived on the resort. We smudged, we prayed, we went to sweats, we, rain dances, stuff like that. And that's something that I always held high. That's a major part of what attracted me to this school in the first place, and that it offered First Nations culture in it, and it made me feel like I was at home.
Powwows used to have to be hidden or we would be punished for them. Our ancestors weren't even allowed to practice those cultures and traditions. I think the powwow for youth really represents that we're taking ownership of our culture. It brings back to mind that First Nations University is not some academic institution that's meant to be off in a corner. It was something that was built from a grassroots effort by Aboriginal people in this country to control our own education.
Shoulders up. I chose First Nations University because it's an institution where my people are represented, and I'm surrounded by my own culture and my own people. We're surrounded by our languages. Even the structure of the building is based on First Nations culture. Rather than something that's kind of unfamiliar to us, we use things that we have seen and we come up with. And that helps us come up with, positive solutions that would benefit our communities.
"70% of the students at the university are women. And like Penny Smoke, many of them are single mothers. Single mothers who've lived right on the edge.
Both my parents are dealing with addiction, either drugs or alcohol. And for myself, I did in the past deal with drugs and alcohol. When I was about 17 years old, my mom, kicked me out and I had nowhere to go. I decided this is it, got to do something. I can't live like this and I don't want to live like this. I'm coming.
Penny Smoke pulled herself out of that life. She's now 28 with 3 children. She's doing communications and media studies. Her dream is to become a journalist.
My own kids, I want them to know that it's normal for kids to go to school every day. I want my kids to know that throughout all this, throughout all the negativity that's happened to our family, that there is positivity and that we can move forward with that.
In First Nations culture, the women are generally considered the backbone of the nation.
See what you've retained from the last class? What's this story about?
The women are the real leaders. They're the ones that are demonstrating, you know, what needs to be done by going to a post-secondary.
For students, the First Nations University is a success. But success costs, studying costs, and the money is drying up.
The funding programs that actually fund First Nations students to go to school, like the Post-Secondary Student Support Program, haven't kept pace with rising tuition, living costs, inflation even, just basic things like that. So actually right now, every year, we're getting less and less money for First Nations education.
We're not just talking about some students with money problems. The entire Aboriginal school system is underfunded. On average, on-reserve schools get $2,000 to $3,000 less per student per year compared to what non-Aboriginal schools in Canada receive. You can figure out the rest. First Nation schools have a huge problem recruiting and holding teachers. There's a big turnover from one year to the next. And that's just one problem.
Education is an investment. I think it's so easy to understand.
You're going to choose to spend this money in one way or the other. They're going to choose to spend it on jails and institutions and medical facilities and child welfare, or they can choose to invest in education and see way greater returns at the end.
We see ourselves definitely taking our place in the Canadian economic system and making a big change in the Canadian society.
Education is everything, you know. My grandmother once told me that education is the new buffalo. The buffalo used to sustain people when we lived off the plains, and now education is our sustainment into the future.
I'll let you in on a little secret. Native people don't want to be dependent. Shocking, I know. Economic development is the way forward. We need commerce, companies, trade. We need jobs. In British Columbia, there's an enormous economic development project on the horizon. $5 billion. And First Nations people are being offered a slice of the profits and maybe hundreds of jobs during the construction phase. And they're saying no. No to this mouth-watering prospect. They don't want to go down this road. Why not?
The last time I came to this place, it was with my great-grandmother when I was a child, and just coming back here brings so much memories. My last memories with her in these waters, setting net for the fish.
Jasmine Thomas is a young Dene Cree leader in British Columbia. For months, she's been leading the fight against the Northern Gateway, a huge project of the Enbridge Company. It's a 1,200-kilometer pipeline that would take crude oil from the Alberta tar sands to the northern coast of British Columbia.
We have never given our consent for this project, and we never will.
Enbridge says it has signed agreements with a dozen communities, but there's still ferocious opposition to the project, notably from at least 50 First Nation communities which sit along the pipeline route, like Jasmine Thomas's home community, the Saycuz First Nation.
This pipeline is going to be crossing some of the most, environmentally sensitive areas. It's not going to go over these major river systems. They're planning to go underneath. There's no way that they can do that and say that it's safe.
The proposed pipeline cuts across BC to end at a terminal on the northwest coast. The economy here is based on fishing. Along the coast, First Nations fear another ecological catastrophe, a repeat of the Exxon Valdez disaster in 1989.
We still harvest a lot from the sea and the land. We still gather cockles, clams, mussels, and we still trade the crab and everything else. We still trade with moose and deer. How important that job is from Enbridge for me and my family? Next to nil. If Enbridge comes through with the super tankers and the super tanker hits the beach somewhere and oil is all over, we lose our food. Everyone is against it.
Get off my land! No pipelines! No tar sands!
Jasmine Thomas and other militants have organized a training course.
What about a lot of eye contact?
About 60 people are learning the basics of non-violent protest.
So one really quick thing before we do that, so this is a non-physical activity.
Enbridge must pass through an environmental assessment process, and a committee is in the midst of determining acceptable risks. The federal government will, in the end, have the final say. Until that moment, the fight against the pipeline will carry on. The protesters are determined. They do not want this project.
Because the work that we do isn't easy. We go out and we try to explain what's going on, but the general public isn't aware. They're not aware that, where the pipeline's going to cross these waters that feed our people.
The First Nations people of British Columbia don't want development that falls from the sky, and above all, that they didn't choose for themselves. On the opposite coast of Canada, let's take a look at a reserve with limited economic choices. Natural resources? None. Land to develop? None. The reserve in question, Membertou, sits in the middle of the city of Sydney on Cape Breton. But the Mi'kmaq have turned Membertou into a success. Young people don't flee this reserve, they flock back to it. So what's its secret?
This building that we're constructing here is Hampton Inn Suites. It's a Hilton Hotel. It's going to help the rest of our businesses become more sustainable, bringing more tourists and people in to stay in Membertou.
Mary Beth Doucette has a degree in business administration and works at the Membertou Band Council. She's one of the young people drawn back to Membertou to help develop the community.
I was living in Toronto about 10 years ago, and that's when Membertou was starting to make the news, and I thought, this would be a phenomenal opportunity to move home.
The 90s were a time of crisis for Membertou. It had just two sources of revenue: federal subsidies and cigarette sales. Its social problems were huge and not surprising: unemployment, alcoholism, and violence.
About 20 years ago, taxi drivers, pizza deliveries, the police officers themselves wouldn't come up to Membertou because they felt very unsafe.
Terry Paul is the band chief and the man who turned Membertou around. His idea was to run Membertou like a business, but a business belonging to the community. To relaunch itself economically, Membertou started with the tried and true, a money earner used by Native communities around North America: games of chance.
These buildings over here they're gaming buildings. It's our main revenue source for Membertou, and we make a couple of $1 million a year. All of that money is reinvested into the community. It's reinvested into our businesses as well as distributed to the community.
But Membertou didn't just depend on casino money. It sent out a message, and the message was this: we're a well-run business, a transparent enterprise. You can take a look at our books. They're open. The transparent approach has reaped profits.
got a phone call from a major defense company, you know, and that was Lockheed Martin. They called us and wanted to do business with us.
Lockheed Martin was a big deal, a computer programming contract with the Canadian Forces. The Band Council went looking for other multinationals. It opened an office in a prestigious building in downtown Halifax. In 2010, the band signed a deal with a Spanish firm to set up a new business developing solar energy production parks in the US and the Maritimes. And now off the Cape Breton coast, Mi'kmaq boats are catching crab and shrimp. In Member 2 today, unemployment has almost vanished. The community is hoping that will encourage more of their young people to return to the reserve.
That's always our goal, and I would hope that that's what our economic success will mean, is that people will have jobs, they'll feel like they have opportunities in the community to be something more than what they are. The future of Member 2 is promising. There's lots of opportunity, there's lots of potential, and I think the future is bright. I definitely want to play a part.
20 years ago, Member 2 was the backwoods. Today, it's uptown.
The North, this huge feeling of immensity. The Inuit feel love for their land because this land is very harsh environment, but very giving at the same time.
In the land the Inuit call the South, Elizabeth Isaac is a star, a pop princess from the North. But she once did social service work in Kuujjuaq schools. Now she's here to help run creative workshops for the local young people.
This weekend we were invited to be big brothers, big sisters for these youth in Kuujjuaq and sort of help them and guide them to express themselves.
I'm really excited. The youth are really going to have so much fun.
Giving resources and giving these great programs, art, cultural programs for the kids, that's the way to go now. I think that's how we're going to solve problems.
Picture a young Inuk. He's maybe 15 or 20 years old with his friends and his music, the internet and Facebook. He feels as though he's connected to the world. But his community is isolated, and it's often not a happy place. The Indian Act doesn't affect the Inuit, but still they've been impacted by assimilation. Children were taken away from their families and sent to residential schools. They still have the scars, and for a young Inuk, the way forward may seem bleak. But in Kuujjuaq, they're gambling that they will defy that expectation, that given the chance, people will express themselves, take control of their lives, and create a new path for the future.
There's a lot of suicide and a lot of drug and alcohol abuse. But I think the youth now, if we think about it, are a little bit fed up to talk about the problems. I think they're ready to move on. So I have a tendency not to talk about the problems anymore because we need to find solutions more than anything.
A really good aspect about youth in Kuujjuaq is that they're very open to everything and anything, and they'll just take this project advantage of, and it's gonna take off like crazy.
Mitchell Tarotili Hataniratan, Tuki Haktirasor Miyarate, Kangapisima Miyu, Uhausare, Unicato Reme, Atuirum Nareme, no Hatikani, Tiguang Utsungalana, Nakukalo, Angayaktusuti, Uyaktusuti, Lausimangito. Nikalor Sutipinel Tahasima Miyu lest at Chigging it in Nehiuaktusuti, Kino Yeruaktusutiloni, Harne Hatasut, Dana. Isimaritsugoka yusigutiri hatta simarakuni chaltati ulqomana. So I'll sing your song. Okay? Hayimavi tukisinavi nalihiya yavirnavi inusile
having fun. But this weekend is also about, we want to know from you guys what you think is going on in this community that we need to talk about.
Jessica Yee is a Mohawk from Akwesasne First Nation in Ontario. She makes things happen around North America. The Inuit are a regular stop for her. This time, like Elisapie, she's come to help young Inuit find the words to express their lives.
If we can't be honest about those pains, that history, the truth about where we're coming from, it's really hard to say we can heal for the future. We have to know what happened in order to move forward in a good way.
What are some of the things that are going on in this community that you don't like? We're saying litter and trash, drugs and alcohol, violence. What about drinking and driving? What are some of the things that you like? Hunting, having a job, being unique. Language. How we can use our culture to deal with all of these things that we don't like.
The throat singing and the drum part at the beginning and at the end, it's fun, but that part has to be as strong. A lot of questions about how I became a singer, but at the same time I'm really curious about their traditional side. It means the throat singing part. So I really felt like they have a very strong foundation that way. Yeah, I'm really excited to be part of this transition where we feel completely free and that we want to reinvent and use our culture.
Positive things that are going on in Aboriginal communities far outweigh the negative if you take the time to count them out, but nobody's ever doing that, particularly around issues of violence and hurt and pain. Nobody's looking to see the resiliency, the survival, and the fact that we're still here.
Yo man, here I am, just trying to live my life, but something inside, it doesn't feel right. It's like I'm going out of my mind. I don't know when this thing is gonna end.
Either we have families who have committed suicide, have been faced with sexual abuse or alcohol and drugs. So making music is not just something easy and something light. It's also about releasing your emotions. The more you believe, the more we believe you, okay? That's what you want. You want us to make us hear what you have to say. It's really powerful. I think that's the biggest thing we can give to those young people is to make them realize that we care for them. I think what has changed is the young people are now very modern, more and more educated, and trying to open to the world. The young people just want to make things better and are much more confident also, which is very new.
Yo, dans une ville appelée Québec, de débarquement, les ancêtres ont fait leur pack-sac pacifiquement sur l'année Canard, en retournant du Canada.
Faire de la musique engagée, pour moi, c'est de donner une voix à des gens qui n'en ont pas. Fait que ma musique, c'est de rassembler les gens, de conscientiser les gens sur ma réalité à moi, sur la réalité de mon peuple. Cette chanson-là est vraiment deux mondes différents, et un pont entre les deux cultures.
Through the example of my walk and the dialogues and the meetings that I had with non-Aboriginal communities, I think I will be able to build bridges and reestablish the links that have been broken many years ago.
We're people first and foremost. We're nations, we're communities, we're cultures, and we're so much more than even the English or French language can describe.
The relationship between the white people and the Inuit, I think it's only gonna get better because we feel confident. When I was younger, I always felt like I was lower than the white people. And now I really feel there's much more confidence in the young people, so that makes a big difference.
We all live in one country, we all want to live peaceful and prosperous lives. You know, we all have the same dreams. So we need to figure out a way to get along.
I have that strong feeling that it's gonna change. I'm sure the knowledge of the non-native people about us will be better. Maybe not all of them, but more and more will be aware of who we were, who we are, and who we want to be tomorrow.
So you see, we Aboriginal people don't want to be just like you, but we want closer links. We want reconciliation, and you probably do too. It's a long, rough road ahead, and there are many potholes. Both sides will have to learn from each other, respect each other, and let's face it, make the odd compromise. Or two, okay, maybe three. But we don't really have a choice. We're all here, and none of us are leaving. We need to, well, paddle together, a bit like it was a few centuries ago. Natives and non-natives, each in their own canoes, all moving forward in the same direction.
Puis tu sais, ma ch'ka aussi m'a remis le sac de